I think this was going to be a better presentation, and Alexia was going to be here to sing you Peter Das, which she had promised to do, but she's also ill, as is Catherine as in Silke. And I hear that this might be some kind of EU protest vote. We're going to get charged £1,000 in an appearance fee, but under new Tory guidelines, of course. However, I probably made that up, and they probably are genuinely ill. I'm going to talk today about St Andrews in Europe, and it might be controversial in some ways. When I first came to St Andrews in 2004, Vice Principal Keith Brown asked me directly in my job interview, what's wrong with the way we do Scottish history? And in a conference that's about the future of Scottish historical studies, I think it's a pertinent question. He asked, can we do it better? What do we do wrong in Scottish history? And I think the questions that I'm going to raise today aren't just about Scottish history, they're about history. They're about pressures put on us by the top down to perform, to appear in public and to speak, to review things, to publish in journals that we're not qualified to talk on. And of course, this all, for me, came to a head with the inaugural lecture of Sally Mapston. Her words echoed some of the concerns that Keith had raised all those years ago, and I'll just pick out some of the parts from her speech. Professor Mapston promised that we should promote vibrant debate and dialogue, that our voices should be heard because of the quality of what we have to say and the quality of what we do here. We would encourage the reclaimed expertise by the value of our research, teaching and outreach. So in the spirit of encouraging vibrant debate, I'm going to suggest that what we didn't get at St Andrews and Europe inaugural conference was the best of what we do here. This was due in part because the speakers themselves were trying to squeeze out what I would perceive as a very limited perspective onto the historical and linguistic interchange between St Andrews and Europe, based on what came over to me as a peripheral interest in the same. We have to ask, why were the speakers selected? What were they trying to get across? The Europe presented to us in that conference was a place where Romance languages, and Romance languages alone, dominated. Latin and French got excellent coverage, very respectful, especially by Dr. Rhiannon Purdy, who gave an absolutely cracking paper, but one that had very little to do with the theme of the conference. But when the speakers were asked by their audience directly about noticeable Scottish influences into European languages and culture, we were met by a resounding, probably not, probably none. And why was that? Where were the Slavic languages? Where were the Baltic languages? Scandinavian languages? Where was German? Who cares about German? It's not like it's an important culture, after all. So how do and did any of such cultural and linguistic influences manifest themselves, both at the time in the 17th century and in the way they've been subsequently received in the 18th, 19th and 20th century? And to look to that, we have to look at people who are engaging with St Andrews in the world who aren't necessarily based in St Andrews. And I'm going to start by plundering the work of my good old friend, Dr. Dmitry Fedosov of the Moscow Academy of Sciences. From his book, The Caledonian Connection, we learn that one George Lermontov of Dersey served as a soldier in Poland and then made his way into the service of the Tsars. He actually did go to Siberia, and he didn't mean Inverness. The Lermonts of Dersey were bailies and provosts of St Andrews, a very strong connection to here. And they founded a dynasty in Russia, which went on to give us Mikhail Lermontov. Now, Lermontov is a poet of the 19th century. Some would say Russia's greatest, some say Russia's second greatest poet. Can we really argue that Mikhail Lermontov actually composed the poetry and songs and verse he did based on his Dersey connection? Where did he get his influence? What was the first book of poetry that Lermontov read? Any volunteers? So you would came, Jamie.
No, I didn't.
He actually read the works of Lord Byron. The clue was actually on the screen. I'm testing to see how observant you are. Why was he reading the works of Lord Byron? Why did he get what clearly is a case of moustache envy? He was reading Byron because his parents, and I'm quoting here the words of his biographer, Tatiana Molchanova, who tells us directly that Lermontov was reading Byron because his parents wanted to reinforce the cultural origins of the Lermontov family. So he was reading a Scottish poet. Was Byron Scottish? Well, he himself said he was born half a Scotsman, bred a whole one. If it wasn't for his Scottish heritage, he wouldn't have read Byron, and therefore Lermontov's grand heroic narratives wouldn't have come to us today. And Lermontov's poetry is today being rendered into vernacular Scots. It's already been translated well into English. So I would argue that that is one simple connection which we can put down to somebody from St Andrews and environs into Europe. But, and here's where ancestor worship, roots tourism and the heritage industry really wind me up. Where in Scotland is the statue to Lermontov? Is it in Bearsay? Any of you seen it? No. It's in Earlston in the Borders, because the ancestor worshippers have decided that he must be related to a certain Thomas Lermont, otherwise known to you lot, or us lot, as Thomas the Rhymer. It's where roots, heritage, and ancestor worship, genealogy, conflates and confuses our relations with St Andrews in Europe, Scotland, Europe, etc., etc. Now, I'm not going to just dwell on the Russians. In the same era as George Lermontov headed off to Russia, other Scots moved into Scandinavia. Ethnic Scots, I'm going to be talking about here. Are they important? Well, Catherine was going to demonstrate to you in the next paper that ethnic Scots are really important. But in the era of POTUS Trump, and that bastard Rupert Murdoch, who unfortunately is a relative, the reclamation, without caveat, of ethnic Scots is a dangerous game. Nevertheless, Thomas Kingo, one of Denmark's finest hymn writers and psalm writers, was the son of one John King from Crail, a weaver, who was forced out of St Andrews in the 1590s due to a decline in St Andrews' economic fortune. Now, all the biographers of Kingo that I've read state that the influences of Kingo's into the hymns and psalms he wrote comes through, and I'm quoting directly through here, the thrift, fighting courage, and plain style that he got from his family. That this is what brought something new into the Danish vernacular hymns, etc., was this Scottish dynamic. It had been missing from Danish hymnals to that point, and we find it through the origins of the influence of Thomas King. He got it because he was brought up in a family of Scots. He may not have lived in Scotland, he'd never set foot in Scotland, but nevertheless, there was something culturally that went into his work. His contemporary was Peter Dass. Now, for those of you that with excellent hearing, the music you heard just as I started was actually one of Peter Dass's better known poems, To God with All Your Might and Courage. And had Alexia not been ill, she was going to stand in front of you and sing 2 weeks to get her persuaded to perform in public, because you'll know she's awful shy. Again, the Norwegians who talk about Peter Dass talk about his Scottish heritage. He was also half Scottish. His father was from Dundas. His work has also, over the years, been translated back and forth into vernacular Scots and into English. Again, his biographers tell us it is directly through the Scots language that he heard in his house that his music and his song becomes so influential. But he could also be quite earthy. This is a translation, one of many translations of Dass's works into Scots that we find in the modern era. This is Simpson from 1985. We'll mind me, my woman, just sniff awa. If the snuff mulls our wee, a big sick would be bra. We brodery Anglis near hidden. Dra out for your sack to your heart's content, your voice will ring out and you'll ken what I meant, like a pig grunting rune in a midden. This is the kind of low-status vernacular poetry that Dass got up to that is said to come directly from his earthy rootedness in Scottish culture. Dass isn't the only influence that we find coming from Scandinavia back to Scotland is our good friend Jamie Reid Baxter has uncovered a corpus of Danish/Danish-Norwegian manuscripts in Scotland. This comes from the Curtis manuscript and it was transcribed by Jamie and Alexia. Now we know that this manuscript reflects Mogens Pedersen's Kratom Spirituale, published in Copenhagen in 1620. But why did it end up in Scotland? We know that Pedersen published it, but did he write it? Who transcribed it in Scotland? What was the significance of it, and why was it here? Was it left to us by one of the 13 Danish students who studied in St Andrews between 1606 and 1612? A period after which Scandinavians stopped coming to St Andrews. Was St Andrews losing its influence? That's a conversation for later. Was the decline in St Andrews to do with the failed Presbyterian coups we heard of yesterday, or miscalculated ventures in Lewis? But what we really want to know is, who wrote this down? Was that a Dane, or was that a Scot? You can't tell by the handwriting. One of our graduates of St Sally's, Sir Robert Anstruther, demonstrates this quite neatly. Here at the top he's writing in Danish, and there at the bottom he's writing in French, both his hand. But notice the script shift he goes through. And he does this when he writes German, he does this when he writes Latin, he does this when he writes Scots. He writes in the appropriate script to the language he writes down. So, with the Curtis manuscript in mind, how many pieces are there in the Curtis manuscript from Denmark, Jamie, can you remember?
About 12, I think.
About 12 different pieces, and they're in different hand.
Yeah,
We don't know who wrote them down. We don't know the significance of this Scandinavian connection. We do know that in Denmark these works are considered influential, but why are they here? Why are they in Scotland? Why, without an investigation into the Europe north of France and Italy, we'll never know what the importance is going to be. If the Curtis manuscript and why it's here baffles us, we have yet more to say about the German connections. Now, by many European contemporaries, the Scots were perceived as low-status mercenary soldiers, small-scale, indolent peddlers. And our good friend Schiller summed this up in this roguish stereotype up rather neatly in a poem reflecting back on the Scottish and German interactions during the 30 Years' War. Jamie.
Nun, da trifft sie alles beisammen an. Doch wo hat sie den Schottländer hingetan, mit dem sie damals herumgezogen?
And in a woman's voice?
Der Spitzbub, der hat mich schön betrogen. Fort ist mit allem davon gefahren, was ich mir tät am Leib ersparen. Ließ mir nichts als den Schlingel da.
Basically, the poem says, where's that Scotsman that you used to hang about with? He basically knocked me up, stole my stuff and buggered off back to Scotland, you bastard. But this low status image of the Scot is something we can challenge through higher literary achievements in Germany. Consider this, the highest German literary society in the 17th century, die Fruchtbringende Gesellschaft. In that society, the highest single component of foreigners were Scotsmen. At the highest, there were only 500 members. There were a dozen Scots in there. No English, no French, no Swedes, 4 Swedes, and one peculiarly Italian, which is General Piccolomini, and we don't know why he's in there. It confuses everyone. He's just I've asked David Worthington, why is Piccolomini in that society for years, and he can't answer it. It's great fun. But the important thing about the Fruchtbringende Gesellschaft, the fruit-bearing society, is that every single member was assigned a plant, or a tree, or a shrub, that would impart their significance to society. What was it these people did? And every single one of them had to write an apprentice piece in Hochdeutsch. The first time that there had been an attempt anywhere to standardize the German language. Jamie.
Der Fleißige. Das Peterskraut zugleich auch Tag und Nacht am Mann heißet, welch fleißig seine Kraft zu jeder Zeit erweiset, im Husten, Ohren wie Stein, Darmgicht, wilden Feuer. den Namen fleißig, drum ich achte wert und teuer. Ja, fleißig, Tag und Nacht in Tugend ich mich übe, der Weisheit Lehre, nach Gott und den Nächsten liebe. Das steht dem Menschen zu, drin alle Frucht erfindt, die ihm nutzen kann, das andere leicht verschwindt.
From Hochdeutsch to Lake Scotch. Parsley at the A-time cried both day and night, and diligently pits to the proof it's poor at ilka time, again host, luggy, the stain, wildfire, gravel in the gut. Sign then, diligent, I think a name both worth and fit. Aye, day and night diligently I'll learn myself virtue and the learned doctrine of the Lord. And in thy brotherly love, yon sicker is what the human being mun do. For there he finds all the fruit he needs, as ilk another is found a glay. Part of a corpus of German poetry of about 20 that were setting for publication, representing both high German culture that the Scots were involved in at the time and how it's rendered into the modern vernacular. If the fruit bringing Gesellschaft is important, and I would argue it is, being the premier German language society, and we can demonstrate the Scottish influence in it, what of Grimmelshausen? This is a book that is set during the 30 Years' War, in which the central character, Simplicissimus, is a Scot, in which his adopted father, in which his real father, the hermit, one of the principal characters, is a Scot, in which his mother, Susan Ramsay, is Scottish, in which the very real General James Ramsay, Governor of Ulm, is a character that gets no less than 3 chapters. I would argue that collectively, the Scottish influence in German literature at the time and subsequently is far more important than what we heard at the St Andrews and Europe Conference on the day. In one section, there's even a reflection of contemporary Scottish thought about the place of virtue and valour. In Grimmelshausen's text, the hermit was so appalled by what he saw in the 30 Years' War, he gave up the noble honours of birth. But in so doing, and in so reflecting, by the way, that's the English edition. The German edition that Catherine was going to read you goes on for 2 pages, just to get that. But that's just a linguistic thing. But look at the words of Robert Munro underneath, a contemporary at the time. Somebody that Grimmelshausen had probably read on valour. It should not be the duty of brave generals to make choice of brave and virtuous commanders, not asking of who they come, but where and how long have they practised to be virtuous. Was Grimmelshausen influenced by Munro? I don't know. Maybe not. Buddha apparently came up with the same thing 500 years BC, so perhaps we can reinvent the same sentiment over and over again. Without the venture to the north, into the Slavic languages, the Scandinavian languages, and the Germanic languages, we only get a partial understanding. And there's more. Many of you know the humanist poet, Andrew Leach. Leach was possibly from Melrose or possibly from Montrose. You'll see transcriptions out of Polish into both. We know that from 1594 until 1638, he published something in the region of 60 Neo-Latin humanist poems. Most of them might be Neo-Latin, or in Latin. However, what do we know of his poetry in Polish? Did his native Scots influence the language of the dozen or so extensive Polish poems? We have got people who can answer that question. Joanna Kopacik at Edinburgh University is a historical linguist who looks at the origins of older Scots and the Polish language. Could she tell us in an investigation, was there an influence there? I'm suggesting that we really have to broaden out from a concept of Europe that is England, France and Spain. Honestly, guys, there's a lot more out there. We can do better. How did our historians perform? We were reassured at the conference that St Andrews was founded by a papal bull. Brilliant. There was an association between St Andrews and Rome. Excellent. We know, and I think this is important, because I didn't know this, that there were pilgrim tokens that people had found and that were distributed all over Europe. There was about a dozen of them. And I think that that was an important point. We moved from the telling of the papal connection and the pilgrim tokens to the retelling of stories of great men, John Knox, George Buchanan, and Andrew Melville. And the not so cutting edge news that many of them studied in Europe before coming back and becoming great men. I want to be clear about this so there's no misunderstanding. The work that Katie has done on the St Andrews Project, the work that Roger is doing and has done on Buchanan and Melville and Knox is important, but it was not the right talk for that conference. We have so much more that we can learn. Do a papal bull, a dozen found pilgrim tokens and 5 great men in a gap year really do justice to the scholarship that's been conducted at doctoral and postdoctoral level at this university on the subject of Scotland or St Andrews and Europe? Prof Mason, and I know it's a feature of time, and I did say on the day that I thought it was a bit off, assured us that in the post-1600 period, St Andrews graduates left Scotland and went to the northern universities, particularly the Dutch Republic. Now this was undoubtedly a nod to his doctoral student Esther Myers, who did her thesis on the subject here at St Andrews. But it's a very, very partial telling of the story of St Andrews graduates in the period under consideration. Not everybody has had the fortune to live happily Presbyterian ever after. Some people went south. Some people went to the Catholic universities. Some people went to the continent to gain a secular education that had nothing to do with the course of the Reformation in Scotland. Adam Marks, one of our recent PhDs, has demonstrated that 17 of these students from St Andrews continued their education within the Scots College at Rome. Others matriculated at Douai, some went to Poitiers, some went to Paris. These are important. Other St Andrews graduates, such as Thomas Craig, doubtless enjoyed their time at St Leonard's, but despite being a sympathetic Presbyterian, he was off to Paris during the period of the Reformation to get his education in law. He returned here after the Reformation was, I'm not going to say over, that's it, after the Reformation Parliament, blah, blah, blah. He came back in 1563. 1563 is a crucial year because a very important St Andrews graduate was kicked out at that point, Father Robert Abercrombie. He was forced to leave the bubble to become a Jesuit in Rome, and from there he lived an itinerant life variously at Brownsburg in Prussia. For several years he stayed in court in both Holyrood and in London at the court of James VI and I. He's the man responsible for the conversion of Anna of Denmark to Catholicism. I think he is important. I think that what he did was created, as Cynthia Fry demonstrated in her thesis on Jacobean diplomacy, it was through Anna of Denmark that James maintained his contact with the papacy. And we could only do that because of the work of Father Abercrombie. I did say not everybody can live happily Presbyterian ever after. Some people like Nicol Byrne were brought up Calvinist, and yet he struggled with the teachings of his colleagues at St Andrews. I particularly love the pretended ministers of the deformed Kirk in Scotland. He published this tract in 1681, only a year after he was kicked out of Scotland. He went on to become a Dominican friar in Spain. Yet his ability to defend Scottish Catholics in Spain, to help encourage them, along with people like William Semple, cannot go without note. We need to discuss who these people are. We can't have a very kind of popularising version of St Andrews place, which always does well, where only the great men who stay there we know about are the only people who count. We can't have that. It does not reflect what this university did. Nor should we be talking just about the students and staff of the university. We're talking about St Andrews in Europe. Marie-Claude Tucker has shown us that many of the St Andreans who went on to Bourges, studied at Paris first. We have a whole collective of these students going down there. What are they studying in Paris? Are they all going to be converted to Jesuits and come back and try and be... No, they're not. They're learning law. They're learning medicine. In the Swedish army, And in the Dutch brigades on the continent, the majority of medical men, physicians who attended every regiment, are Paris-trained surgeons. They're not getting their medical education in Scotland. They're preventing deaths on the battlefield through an education gained in France. It has nothing to do with religion, and we should know that. That said, for some St Andreans, the Reformation was absolutely central to their European journey. Andrew Melville's exile in Sudan, we know he was accompanied at times by other St Andreans like William McDowell and luminaries from elsewhere, such as John Dury, his great-nephew. Why was he in Sudan? Well, we heard from Jamie and others yesterday. He's there because of the dark times, because Presbyterianism is falling into abeyance in Scotland. That St Andrews and the East New are hemorrhaging their Presbyterian population. They're going to other places to get their education, to continue their teaching. But not everybody was convinced by their teaching. John Dury rejects his great-uncle's teachings and goes on to be one of the greatest Irenicists in Europe. He provokes the syncretic debates in Sweden directly and almost gets Sweden to give up their dogmatic approach to Lutheranism. An imported man, but not from St Andrews. The Reverend John Douglas had been ordained in 1606 as a minister to the Scots Brigade in the Dutch Republic, as they collectively fought as the Calvinist International during the Dutch 80 Years' War. Simultaneously, and importantly, Douglas also served as minister to the English Church in Amsterdam. By 1621 he came home and he got a doctorate in St Andrews before returning to the Lithuanian town of Kėdainiai, where the congregation was so full of exiles, fleeing the Episcopalian wrath of Charles I, that he had to preach in the Scots language. Something in that you should read in the work of Romantis Zergulish. Other Presbyterian clergy were itinerant and committed to the idea of the Reformation. Catherine Zickerman demonstrated in her thesis here. Thomas Young graduated from St Andrews in 1606 before working as the tutor to the young John Milton. England can't be removed from Europe in the 17th century, or at all. We are in Europe now. Europe isn't over there. Europe is here. Europe is England. Europe is Scotland. Europe is Ireland. Arguably, Europe is also Iceland, but that's a different story. The important point here, that by having a Scottish Presbyterian minister in an English congregation, a position he got through his work with Milton, then we're seeing the evolution of a Britishness, a Britishness forming on the continent. How do we know it's a Britishness? Because the people who attended that congregation told us. Britannia ist mein Patria, darin ich geboren bin, said General James King when he was asked where did he come from. One of the most important people that he met as he was minister to that congregation in Hamburg was the previously mentioned St Andrews graduate Robert Anstruther. Anstruther was only one of a number of St Andrews graduates who excelled in the field of diplomacy. Cynthia Fry's thesis is full of them. But it's not just diplomacy and high people, people of great status, that we should be looking at here. If you plunder these PhDs, as I have for this talk, because I'm not talking about what I've researched, I'm talking about what they've researched. If you look into Captain's thesis, into Siobhan's thesis, into Claire's thesis, what do we find? We find something very telling about the economic state of St Andrews. Each of the works talk about St Andrews ships trading. We can name them. The St Andrews vessel the Salamander, trading with France in 1585. In 1588, the new ship of St Andrews, trading wine, but not to St Andrews, trading it to Tripoli and trading it to Turkey, not trading to here. The St Michael of St Andrews traded between London and Bordeaux. Why was St Andrews not able to keep her ships? Why were these people moving abroad? And these people were moving abroad and taking their vessels with them. In 1597, David Balfour left St Andrews with his ship and went on to become master shipbuilder for the King of Denmark. He never came back. His relative William Balfour, Baillie of St Andrews, relocated with his vessels to Danzig. He never came back. We know why he went to Danzig, because in Danzig, James Balfour was the richest merchant in the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, and he was there with a whole cluster of St. Andreans. In the monogendered Europe we learned about in November, we didn't hear about people like Christine Balfour, yet we know her wealth, we know her confession of faith, we know where she went to church, we know who she married, we know who she hung out with, we know who she adopted, and yet we didn't hear about women. The recent work of Peter Colbert and Waldemar Kowalski has alerted us to that in this one city alone, 26 St. Andreans who identify as such. Now, I'll put this in perspective. We've got 6 people called Balfour who we know are from St. Andrews because they tell us, but we've got more people called Balfour we don't know where they come from. Relatives, not relatives, from St. Andrews. In the other family, the Forets, who moved into Sweden, we can say that 4 of them came from St. Andrews. Where did the other 26 in Sweden come from? We don't know. We can assume they're from St. Andrews and environs, but we won't be so presumptuous as to make that claim. Where did they go? Where have all this scholarship told us that people went? Katie put up a very good map showing us where the found pilgrim tokens were. I'm going to put up a map which is very similar, showing where the large communities are of Scots. Now, it's not the 30,000 in Poland, Lithuania that's long been asserted. It's about 7,000 or 8,000 over a 100-year period. A community not much bigger than that in Scandinavia, Norway, half the size of what's in Ireland, that's the biggie. We don't know about England yet, because Keith Brown hasn't finished his research yet. But wherever you find large Scottish communities, you find St. Andreans. But here's something which I found pretty interesting. Bearing in mind that what I'm about to tell you comes from the same research in the same archives, birth records, death records, church records, Burgess lists, etc., etc., there are more people leave St. Andrews between 1590 and 1630 than leave from Crail, Pittenweem, Anstruther, Dunfermline and Couros combined. What is happening in this city, this borough, that is leading to the hemorrhaging of people? Not just the Presbyterians going off because they're not wanted anymore by the Episcopal Church. What about the merchants? What about the goldsmiths, the twiners? Why are people leaving with their ships and never coming back? That's a question for people who study St. Andrews, and it's not one that I'm even going to attempt to answer. We can demonstrate that these people didn't necessarily lose their affiliation with St. Andrews. James Balfour, in addition to founding a hospital in Danzig, in addition to funding several Presbyterian churches in Danzig, also repatriated money back to Scotland. He wasn't the only one. Here's the will of a soldier. Remember them, the roguish ones that we talked about? I would say you can read quite clearly. Maybe get Rachel to read that, because that's really her forte. Here is a Scottish soldier, Harry Lindsay, colonel in the Swedish army, based in Germany. And what's he doing? He's leaving 10,000 marks to any poor scholar with a name of Lindsay who wants to study at the Old College of St. Andrews. Now, my bet is that in today's money, that's worth a few quid, and we should get onto the proctor and find out it's claimed and set up a scholarship. Because it's a legal document, so presumably it's still binding. I don't know. What I'm trying to get at is that the expatriate community at all their levels are important to us. That they are keeping their contact with St. Andrews, even in bizarre ways like the repatriation of capital. But let's look at the Forets. Between 1610 and 1650, 15 Forets, I always want to say Futrets or Ferrets or something, 15 Forets moved into Scandinavia from St. Andrews or environs. The fame of the family comes through Alexander, who killed a fellow Scot in a knife fight because the other Scot, James Logan, pulled a knife on one of the Swedish admirals. It is his first day in Swedish service, by the way. However, our man Foret was allowed to redeem himself, and he did it by committing suicide. He committed suicide by sailing a ship into the middle of a Polish fleet, allowing Polish ships to board it, and he sank by blowing up the magazine. By tossing the flame at the magazine of his own powder kegs, he blew up his own ship and 2 Polish ships, sank all 3. For this act, his 2 brothers were ennobled. His wife, also a Scot from St. Andrews, Miss Rutherford, was given a pension for life. The fame of the family, then, grew. Not a Polish ship would fly near a foreign vessel as they flew the foreign flag, which I've still yet to identify. But the foreign connection is interesting. This man here, James Spence of Wormston, general in the British Army, and I mean the British Army, he's general of the British in the British Brigades in Sweden, from Wormston in Fife. Spence married Margaret Forrest, the daughter of Captain John Forrest, showing that Fifers kept tight company. After Spence's death in 1632, Margaret received 1,000 Riksdaler, that's £250 sterling, pension for life. She went on to marry 2 other Scottish generals who seemed to be able to see them off and live off their pensions. However, why is Margaret Forrest important? She's important because she received a state funeral in Stockholm in the Riddarholm kyrkan. This is the state church. We can see here that Margaret Forrest has also left us a corpus of letters. She's very comfortable in her native German, because German is one of the state languages of Sweden. Why don't we know about her? Why don't we know about that state funeral? She's buried 50 paces from Gustav Adolf. We know about him, right? Boy wonder. But we don't know about Margaret. She's from St Andrews, and we've got a corpus of letters. We've got hundreds of letters from Margaret. Who else is from environs? Isabel Spence, another Fifer with a state funeral. Does this mean anything? Is there more that we can tell about St Andrews in Europe? I would argue there are. The collection of letters of 5 women, this is Catherine Trail, by the way, if you can't read it, is extensive. We're collating them, we're going to get them transcribed, we're going to hopefully get them published. But I want you to look, and this is just a bit of fun before I end, at this one here by Margaret Bursey. What is curious about this letter? It's written in Swedish, fair enough. Why is it written in Swedish? Because she was born in Sweden. She was only half Scottish, but who's going to read that beautiful way that she signs off? Look at that hand. God bless your lordship, may your lordship pity me. In Scots, even with a yaw, which is supposed to be obsolete, I do like an obsolete yaw. The importance of the ethnic Scots is coming out here. Where did she learn to write like that? It is her hand. I've seen more than one of her letters. And yet, we don't know about it. So, to kind of wrap this up, how am I going to conclude this? I'd start by saying that Scotland and Europe, St Andrews and Europe, should not be the sole preserve of great men. It should be people of all strata. It should be people of every gender, whether they're great men or whether they're not. Whether they're great women, as 2 of these, 2 state funerals, seriously, and we don't know about them, or not. I think that's important. So how to wrap it up? I'm not going to dwell on the November conference, it is what it is. But I want to ask this. When a themed conference opportunity comes along, can we be sure to accept the topic when we actually have something to say on the subject at hand? Can I also make that plea for when we review books in journals, so that we don't just review a book because we want it, because we want to save ourselves 50 quid? It doesn't do our discipline any good to have people who are partially informed on a subject being seen to, or being perceived as, luminaries or expertise. I don't think it reflects well on the quality of what we have to say and the quality of what we do. And I think we do have to follow Professor Mapson's advice and reclaim that expertise, not just the expertise of the people in this university, but all the other people who work in this field. We should acknowledge those people who've worked in the field in the past, Chris Smout, Thomas Fisher, A.F. Stewart. We should acknowledge the honorary fellows we've got actually at the ISHR now who work on this, Captain Zuckerman, Alexia Grosjean. But what really I want to say is, let's respect the work of our research students. If Sally ever gets round to reviewing this, which I doubt if she will, I'd like her to consider these people for a thesis entitled, and it's not a good effort. I actually have a list here for a thesis entitled, by Esther Mylers, Scotland and the United Provinces, 1680 to 1730. Captain Zickerman, Across the German Sea, Scottish Community Exchange Network Building in the Elbe Vessel region. Siobhan Talbot, An Alliance Ended. Franco-Scottish Commercial Relations, 1560 to 1713. Claire McLaughlin, Scottish Commercial Contacts with the Iberian World. Cynthia Fry, Diplomacy and Deception, King James VI of Scotland's Foreign Relations with Europe. Amy Aberlin, Trade and Diplomacy between Scotland and Flanders, 1320 to 1530. These are the people whose work I've plundered for today's talk. This isn't my research. And I think if we're going to show off to the principal, we should maybe reflect on the good scholarship, not just that has been done here, but that is being done here, and we should speak up for our research students.